The elevator climbed 38 floors without a sound, not even a hum. I counted the seconds in my head. 42 to reach the penthouse. The doors opened to reveal a single receptionist at a glass desk, the Los Angeles skyline spread out behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Mr. Wilson is expecting you, Mr. Rodriguez." She didn't look up from her screen. "Last door on the right." I walked down a hallway lined with abstract art pieces that probably cost more than my annual income. My boots were the only sound against the polished concrete floor. The contrast between my weathered field jacket and this sterile environment wasn't lost on me. The door stood open. Spencer Wilson sat behind a desk made from a single slab of wood, fingers steepled, watching me enter. A man used to being the most important person in any room. I'd seen his type before, the kind who bought their way into danger, then paid others to get them out. James Rodriguez. He didn't stand. Punctual. I appreciate that. I took the chair across from him, noting its calculated discomfort, slightly lower than his, angled to catch the morning glare. Power positioning. I shifted it 2 inches to the left before sitting. "Your message mentioned an expedition." I kept my voice neutral. "And substantial compensation." Wilson nodded once, then tapped something on the glass surface of his desk. A 3-dimensional topographic map appeared between us, projected from recessed lenses. An island, roughly 8 miles across at its widest point. Dense jungle covered most of the interior, with a volcanic peak rising from the center. The coastline alternated between sheer cliffs and curved beaches. "This is Yasser Island." Wilson's hand passed through the projection, rotating it. Located approximately 300 miles northeast of Fiji. Technically unclaimed territory. I studied the projection. Volcanic? Dormant for at least 4 centuries, according to geological surveys. He expanded the image. "What interests me is that it remains completely uninhabited and largely unexplored. There's usually a reason for that." Something changed in Wilson's expression, a tightening around the eyes. "The local Ami tribe from neighboring islands refuses to go near it. Superstition. They claim the island is cursed, that it speaks to visitors in the voices of their dead." I'd heard similar stories throughout the Pacific. Indigenous knowledge often contained kernels of truth wrapped in mythology. Underwater currents, poisonous plants, geological instabilities reframed as spiritual dangers. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Wilson?" $5 million, he stated the figure flatly. "For 2 weeks on the island. You'll lead a research team, establish a base camp, and ensure everyone returns safely. Your Air Force background and survival expertise make you uniquely qualified." I kept my expression neutral despite the figure. $5 million would solve every financial problem I'd faced since leaving the service 3 years ago. It would secure Clara's college fund. The amount was deliberately excessive. Either the job was extraordinarily dangerous, or Wilson needed something he wasn't disclosing. "What's your interest in an uninhabited island?" Wilson leaned back. "Scientific discovery. Untouched ecosystems potentially contain botanical compounds with pharmaceutical applications. There's also the anthropological value of investigating why the island remains uninhabited despite being perfectly habitable." I'd heard enough sales pitches to recognize deflection. "And your actual reason?" A slight smile appeared. "I appreciate directness, Rodriguez. Let's say I have investors interested in potential development opportunities, pending verification that the island doesn't contain any protected species or archaeological sites that would prevent private acquisition." That made more sense. Resort development. Luxury retreats for the ultra-wealthy. The research team provided plausible deniability if environmental groups started asking questions. "Tell me about the team composition." Wilson tapped his desk again. The island disappeared, replaced by personnel files that floated between us. 2 scientists specializing in botany and marine biology, an anthropologist to document any cultural artifacts, a geologist to assess stability and resource potential, 2 security contractors with military backgrounds, all experienced professionals who've signed comprehensive confidentiality agreements. I studied each file briefly. Advanced degrees, field experience, equipment lists that suggested serious research capacity, transportation and extraction, my private jet to Fiji, from there a seaplane to the island, which you'll pilot. The plane remains moored at the island for immediate extraction if necessary. Satellite phones, emergency beacons, and twice-daily check-ins with my operations center. I nodded slowly, processing the information. The setup was thorough, which made me more suspicious of what Wilson wasn't telling me. Local authorities? Fully informed of our research expedition. Permits secured. Wilson closed the projection with a swipe. I should mention that this offer expires when you leave this room. I have 3 other candidates with similar qualifications. A standard negotiation tactic, but effective. I studied his face, looking for tells. His expression remained placid, controlled. When would this expedition begin? Tomorrow morning, 7:30 departure from my private airfield in Santa Monica. The timeline was deliberately accelerated, designed to minimize second thoughts and outside research. A red flag, but not necessarily a deal breaker. I'd need equipment allowances, my own gear. Already accounted for. 200 pounds personal equipment allocation, additional $50,000 advance for any specialized purchases you deem necessary. I considered what I knew and what remained unclear. The money was exceptional. The job aligned with my skill set. The risks seemed manageable with proper preparation. My instincts warned me Wilson wasn't being entirely forthcoming, but that was standard with private contracts. I'll need the contract now, not tomorrow. I met his gaze, with specific extraction protocols and emergency contingencies in writing. Wilson opened a drawer and removed a leather portfolio, sliding it across the desk without hesitation. Already prepared. Page 6 covers extraction procedures. Page 8 details emergency protocols, including medical evacuation. The immediate production of the document confirmed he'd been confident of my acceptance before I arrived. I took my time reading each page, noting specific clauses about confidentiality and intellectual property rights. The payment terms were clear, half on departure, half on successful return. After 20 minutes of silent reading, I placed the contract on the desk. I'll need a copy for my records. Of course. Wilson produced a pen. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Rodriguez? I took the pen, aware of its substantial weight. Custom made, likely platinum. We do. I signed where indicated and passed the document back. Wilson signed without reading, then pressed his thumb to a small scanner embedded in the corner of the page. Welcome aboard. He extended his hand across the desk. My assistant will process your advance immediately. 7:30 tomorrow. Don't be late. His handshake was firm, dry, practiced, the kind perfected through thousands of business deals. As I rode the silent elevator back to the lobby, I mentally cataloged the gear I'd need to purchase and what I already had. The contract sat heavy in my inside pocket. $5 million for 2 weeks on an uninhabited island. Nothing was ever that simple or that lucrative without complications. But I'd navigate those when they appeared. I always did. I arrived at the private airfield at 6:45, carrying my duffel and equipment case. The pre-dawn air held the crisp bite that Southern California gets only in winter mornings, and fog lingered in patches across the tarmac. Spencer Wilson's Gulfstream G650 sat prepped on the runway, its sleek white fuselage gleaming under spotlights. Ground crew loaded equipment into the cargo hold while a customs official examined manifests at a folding table. A cluster of people stood near the hangar entrance. 7 figures, 6 team members plus Wilson. I watched them for a moment before approaching, cataloging postures and interactions, the way I'd been trained to do in the Air Force. Old habits. The tallest figure broke away and strode toward me. Spencer Wilson wore the same expression of controlled impatience I'd seen in his office, though he'd traded the bespoke suit for what looked like $5,000 expedition wear. Pants with too many pockets, jacket with unnecessary reinforcements. Everything pristine and unused. Rodriguez. Good. He checked his watch. Everyone's here. Let's make introductions and get moving. I followed him to the group. They'd already separated into natural configurations, the two security contractors standing slightly apart, equipment at their feet. The scientists clustered together with tablets and notebooks, one man standing alone, arms crossed. Wilson made perfunctory introductions, gesturing to each person in turn. Emily Johnson, anthropologist. David Smith, botanical pharmacology. Sarah Williams, marine biology. Robert Brown, geological survey. He pointed to the two security men. Thomas Miller, Scott Davis, tactical support. I nodded to each. Emily Johnson stepped forward first, extending her hand, mid-30s practical field clothes already worn at the knees and elbows. Hair pulled back tight, glasses that looked like they could take a beating. Her handshake was firm, direct. Heard about your extraction work in the Colombian rainforest, she said. 8 researchers, flash flooding, impressive navigation. I hadn't expected that reference. Different scenario, different risks. Always is. She studied my face, assessing. Any experience with Pacific Island cultures? 3 rotations through Guam, training exercises on Okinawa, nothing anthropological. She nodded once. The Ami people avoid Yasur Island completely. I've been trying to find out why, but there's minimal documentation. Most accounts are dismissed as superstition. Before I could respond, David Smith pushed forward, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. Sunburned face, dirt under his fingernails despite the early hour. James, fantastic to meet you. His handshake pumped twice too many times. I've been studying satellite imagery of the island's vegetation zones. The isolation from other land masses suggests potential for endemic species development. Could be dozens of undocumented plants with unique chemical properties. He hasn't stopped talking about plants since we arrived, Emily said, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. David grinned, unembarrassed. We're talking potential breakthrough compounds, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, maybe even neurological applications. Virgin ecosystems are pharmaceutical gold mines. Wilson cleared his throat pointedly. Time for detailed discussions on the flight. Rodriguez needs to check your equipment lists. Sarah Williams approached next, her movements precise and economical. She carried herself with the controlled posture of someone accustomed to balancing on boat decks. Her handshake was brief, professional. Marine samples are my priority, she said. Particularly interested in the coral formations visible in the satellite imagery. They show unusual structural patterns. Robert Brown remained where he stood, arms still crossed. I approached him instead. Close-cropped gray hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a build that suggested previous physical strength now softening with age. His handshake was perfunctory. You seem less enthusiastic than the others, I said. I go where the money is. His voice had the gravelly quality of someone who'd breathed too much mineral dust. 5 million buys a lot of enthusiasm, even for an island the locals won't touch. Then why the tension? He glanced at Wilson, who had moved away to speak with the pilot. 25 years of field work teaches you when something doesn't add up. Wilson's spending 50 million minimum on this expedition. For what? Pharmaceutical prospects that might pan out in 10 years? Resort development on an island indigenous people avoid? He shook his head. There's something he's not telling us. I filed that observation away, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. What's your geological focus? Mineral composition, water table mapping, stability assessment. He gestured toward several hard cases being loaded. Ground-penetrating radar, core sampling equipment, standard survey package. The security contractors approached next, moving with the synchronized awareness of men who'd worked together before. Thomas Miller, the taller one, had the hypervigilant eye movements I recognized from forward deployment zones. Scott Davis had the compact build and steady hands of someone comfortable with weapons systems. Afghanistan or Iraq? I asked, noting the particular callus pattern on Miller's right hand. Both, Miller answered. Plus 5 years private sector, Sudan, Venezuela, Indonesian mining operations. Davis nodded. We handled security for 3 of Wilson's previous expeditions: Thailand, Ecuador, northern Russia. I checked their equipment: custom-modified AR platforms, sidearms, tactical vests with ceramic plates. Standard private security loadout, though the quantity suggested preparation for significant threats rather than routine precaution. Rules of engagement? I asked. Defensive only, Davis said. Wildlife deterrence. Perimeter security. We're not anticipating human threats on an uninhabited island. Everything's cleared with local authorities, Miller added. Full documentation for the weapons transit. Wilson returned, checking his watch again. Wheels up in 15. Rodriguez, verify the equipment manifest and sign off. Everyone else, board now. The team dispersed toward the plane while I followed a ground crew member to inspect the cargo. 12 large equipment cases contained the scientific instruments: mass spectrometers, portable DNA sequencers, ground-penetrating radar. 8 waterproof containers held camping gear, water purification systems, and medical supplies. 4 hard cases carried the security equipment. My own gear looked modest by comparison. The customs official handed me a clipboard with the manifest. I checked each item against what I'd seen loaded, noting weights and dimensions, then signed the bottom. Procedure before departure, always. Wilson approached as I finished. Everything satisfactory? Equipment looks comprehensive. I handed back the clipboard. Somewhat excessive for a 2-week survey. I prefer thoroughness. His tone made clear the topic wasn't open for discussion. The seaplane is already in Fiji. Cessna Caravan on amphibious floats should accommodate all essential equipment for the second leg. I boarded the jet last, noting how the team had arranged themselves. Emily and Sarah sat together, comparing notes on tablets. David had spread botanical reference materials across his table. Robert sat alone, staring out a window. The security contractors occupied the rear seats, equipment between them. Wilson took a single seat near the front, already engrossed in his phone. I stored my bag and took an empty seat with sight lines to everyone. The engines spooled up, and the safety briefing played automatically on cabin screens. No flight attendants, just the cockpit crew behind a closed door. As we taxied, Emily moved to sit across from me. "You've got questions," she said. It wasn't a question. "About the island?" "Several." "About us." She gestured toward the team. "You're evaluating whether we'll be liabilities in the field." I didn't deny it. "Standard procedure for expedition leadership." She nodded. "I've done 17 field expeditions, including 3 to remote Pacific islands. Published work on cultural migration patterns across Oceania. My father was an anthropologist who specialized in indigenous knowledge systems before..." She hesitated. "Before switching to administrative work, I know how to conduct myself in challenging environments." "Your interest in this particular island?" "The complete absence of human habitation despite its habitability. Islands with fresh water, abundant food sources, and strategic positions are never left empty in the Pacific, not for thousands of years of human migration." She lowered her voice. "And the Ami avoidance suggests cultural significance that contradicts typical settlement patterns. That's worth investigating." The plane reached cruising altitude. David moved to join our conversation, bringing a tablet filled with plant diagrams. "The botanical potential is extraordinary," he said, showing me satellite imagery with vegetation zones highlighted. "This northwestern section shows color variations consistent with unique alkaloid-producing species, and these coastal formations could be mangrove relatives with novel chemical properties." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, if excessive. Sarah remained in her seat, methodically organizing waterproof notebooks. Robert stared at the ceiling, apparently lost in thought. The security team checked their phones one last time before service would cut out over the Pacific. Wilson remained isolated, typing rapidly on his laptop. Whatever drove him to spend $50 million on this expedition, he clearly didn't feel the need to socialize with those implementing it. 8 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Pacific, the dynamics had settled. David talked almost constantly about botanical discovery potential, pausing only when Emily steered the conversation toward cultural context. Sarah contributed precise observations about marine ecosystems but avoided personal topics. Robert said little, reviewing geological surveys with a furrowed brow. I used the galley prep area to make coffee, and Thomas joined me. "What's your read on Wilson?" he asked quietly, glancing toward the front where our employer remained absorbed in his work. "Professional, driven, not forthcoming?" Thomas nodded. "This is our third job for him. First two were straightforward, security for resource surveys. This one," he shrugged, "different vibe, more equipment, more secrecy, bigger paycheck. You worried?" "Cautious." He measured creamer into his cup with precision. Wilson quadrupled our usual rate, told us to prepare for unusual wildlife encounters without elaborating, wouldn't let us contract additional personnel. "What kind of wildlife are you expecting?" "Nothing specific in the briefing materials, just potentially aggressive indigenous species." He sipped his coffee. "Could be wildcats, could be Komodo dragons, could be nothing. But when someone pays this much, they're expecting something." I returned to my seat with that information filed away. The plane began its descent toward Fiji as evening approached. Through the windows, the scattered islands of the archipelago appeared as dark shapes against the deepening blue of the Pacific. Emily sat beside me during landing. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked. "Feel what?" "The gaps, the missing pieces." She gestured toward Wilson. "He's not telling us everything. The Ami don't avoid the island because of dangerous animals or bad weather. It's something else." I didn't confirm or deny her suspicion. "We'll learn more on the ground." She studied my face. "You're very controlled, James. I'm guessing military does that, teaches you to compartmentalize, observe without revealing. It's useful. Until it isn't." She glanced at the others. "Everyone here has professional reasons for coming, but 50 million suggests more than academic interest." She paused. "I wonder what Wilson really wants from Yasur Island." The wheels touched down on the Fiji runway with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied toward the private terminal, I watched each team member prepare for disembarkation, the small, unconscious habits that revealed character. David packed his materials with surprising care. Sarah checked her equipment list 3 times. Robert moved stiffly, wincing as he stood. The security team was first on their feet, automatically positioning themselves near the exit. Wilson finally closed his laptop. "We refuel and transfer equipment to the seaplane. Departure at dawn. The meteorological forecast for Yasur shows clear conditions for the next 72 hours. As the cabin door opened, warm, humid air rushed in. The scent of salt water and tropical vegetation replaced the sterile atmosphere of the plane. Something about that moment, the threshold between controlled environment and the raw, natural world, triggered a sensation I'd learned to respect over years of fieldwork. Unease, not fear, not concern. Just the quiet recognition that we were moving into something unknown. I'd felt it before dangerous missions, before unexpected complications. I followed the team down the stairs, watching them fan out across the tarmac, already focusing on their specialized tasks. Whatever Wilson's true motivation, whatever secrets Yasur Island held, we were committed now. Dawn would take us to our destination. I just hoped we were prepared for what we'd find. The Cessna caravan floated 20 yards from Fiji's private airstrip, tethered to a weathered dock that creaked with each minor swell. Its amphibious floats gleamed in the morning light. I'd flown similar models during extraction operations in the Philippines, reliable workhorses that forgave minor errors and handled rough water better than they had any right to. I circled the aircraft twice, checking control surfaces and inspecting the hull for damage. The pre-flight checklist took 17 minutes. Thomas and Scott helped transfer our equipment from the transport vehicles, measuring each case against the seaplane's cargo capacity. We'd need to leave behind some of the redundant gear. Weight limitations, Robert asked, watching me calculate figures on a clipboard. 2,200 pounds maximum, including personnel. I tapped the manifest. We're over by 400. Emily approached, already having anticipated this problem. I've marked priority equipment with green tags. Everything with yellow can wait for a second trip if necessary. I nodded. There won't be a second trip. We make weight, or we reconfigure. Wilson arrived last, stepping from an air-conditioned SUV with a satellite phone in hand. He surveyed our loading operation with barely concealed impatience. Weather window is optimal today, he said, checking his watch. The forecast shows potential systems developing in 36 hours. David clutched a case of sample containers to his chest. These are non-negotiable. Custom gas chromatography equipment. I made the necessary adjustments to the manifest, cutting where possible. We eliminated backup camping gear, reduced water reserves since the island reportedly had freshwater streams, and left behind one of the radar units. Thomas and Scott consolidated ammunition into a single case. The loading took 43 minutes. I assigned seats based on weight distribution, putting Sarah and Emily toward the front, Robert and David in the middle, and the security team at the rear where their heavier frames would balance the equipment load. Wilson wasn't coming. He'd monitor from Fiji and coordinate with his corporate center. Daily check-ins at 0700 and 1900, Wilson reminded me, handing over the satellite phone. Emergency protocols as outlined in Section 8. The extraction timeline remains flexible based on your findings. His handshake was perfunctory. He'd already mentally moved on to whatever business occupied the remainder of his schedule. The caravan's engine turned over smoothly. Instruments showed normal readings across the board. I taxied away from the dock, feeling the familiar resistance of water against the floats. The seaplane gathered speed across the glassy surface, then lifted free, climbing toward 3,000 feet. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, a topographical map spread across her knees. Heading 275, she confirmed, comparing our course with her GPS tablet. 3 hours of endless blue stretched before us. The ocean rippled far below, occasionally broken by the white wake of a fishing vessel or cargo ship. Conversation behind me dwindled as each team member retreated into preparation. David flipped through botanical reference materials, muttering occasionally about potential endemic species differentiation. Sarah studied marine migration patterns on her tablet. Robert slept, his head propped against the window. The security team performed equipment checks, methodically inspecting each piece of gear before repacking it. 2 hours and 17 minutes into the flight, Emily tapped my arm and pointed ahead. First visual. Yasur Island materialized on the horizon, a jagged green teardrop rising from the Pacific. The volcanic peak stood approximately 2,000 feet above sea level, its slopes covered in dense vegetation that ran nearly to the water's edge. White sand beaches wrapped the southern and eastern sides, while sheer cliffs dominated the northern face. Looks exactly like the projection, I said. Emily frowned, making notes. Unusual lack of coastal development. Most Pacific islands show some evidence of human presence. Fishing camps, temporary structures, boat landings. As we descended to 1,200 feet for a closer look, something shifted in my perception. The island was objectively beautiful, vibrant greens against turquoise waters, perfect beaches untouched by footprints. But something felt wrong. Not dangerous, necessarily. Just wrong. I'd experienced similar sensations before, usually before ambushes or natural disasters. The atmospheric pressure before a storm, the unnatural silence before an attack. Nothing specific I could identify or report, just a feeling that crawled across the back of my neck. "You feel it too," Emily said quietly. Not a question. I circled the island once, noting potential landing sites. The western lagoon offered the calmest water and closest access to the beach. I began the approach, watching for submerged obstacles or unexpected currents. "Everyone secure your equipment," I called back. "Landing in 3 minutes." The caravan settled onto the lagoon's surface with minimal resistance. I cut the engine to idle and let momentum carry us toward the beach. The water was remarkably clear. I could see white sand 15 feet below, unmarked by anchor scars or debris. "We made it," David said, his excitement breaking the silence. "Untouched botanical paradise. Look at those tree lines. Completely undisturbed canopy structure." I steered the plane parallel to the shore, approximately 30 yards out. The water depth held steady at 8 feet, close enough to unload easily, deep enough to keep the aircraft safely afloat. "Thomas, Scott, secure a line to shore and begin unloading procedures," I said. "Sarah, scan the beach for any signs of wildlife. Robert, identify the most stable ground for base camp. Emily, document initial observations." The methodical work of establishing our presence began immediately. Thomas waded to shore with a mooring line, securing it to a fallen tree trunk. Scott followed with the first equipment cases. The water reached mid-thigh, warm against my legs as I helped pass gear from plane to shore. The beach extended approximately 60 yards from water to jungle's edge. Fine white sand gave way to harder packed ground near the tree line, where gnarled roots reached toward the shore. No footprints, no garbage, no coconut husks or fishing line, no bird tracks at the water's edge. "Check your equipment thoroughly before moving inland," I reminded everyone. "Once we establish base camp, maintain visual or radio contact at all times." It took 73 minutes to unload the plane and arrange equipment in organized clusters on the beach. The sun beat down from directly overhead, pushing the temperature to approximately 92 degrees, with humidity to match. Despite the heat, no one complained. $50 million tends to suppress minor discomforts. Emily walked the length of the beach, taking photographs and soil samples every 20 feet. Her methodical documentation contrasted with David's barely contained excitement as he hovered at the jungle's edge, cataloging visible plant species. "James," Sarah called from where she knelt at the waterline. "Come look at this." I joined her, noting the unusual clarity of the water. She pointed to the sand beneath the gentle waves. "No shells," she said. "No crustacean remains, no seaweed deposits." I scanned the beach in both directions. "Could be the current patterns." She shook her head. "Even the most isolated beaches show some evidence of marine life cycle. This is..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Sterile." Robert joined us, notebook in hand. "Same observation on land. No insect activity in the sand. No burrowing evidence." "There's plenty of life in the jungle," David called, pointing to the dense vegetation. "Complex ecosystem structure. Multiple canopy layers." I made a note to establish baseline environmental readings before nightfall. Whatever scientific anomalies existed, we needed documentation rather than speculation. By mid-afternoon, we'd established a perimeter. Thomas and Scott set up motion sensors at 20-yard intervals along the tree line. Tents formed a semicircle facing the water, with the command center, a reinforced canopy housing communications equipment, positioned centrally. "Radio check," I said into the handheld unit. 5 confirmations came back immediately, each team member reporting their position and status. Thomas approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Perimeter is secure. No signs of large wildlife or human presence. Motion detectors active." "Generator?" I asked. "Operational." solar backup charging, fuel reserves for 14 days at current consumption rates. I nodded, making a note on my clipboard. Mandatory equipment check at 1800. First communication window with base at 1900. The day passed in the structured routine of camp establishment. Water purification systems were tested with samples from both the ocean and a small stream that emerged from the jungle 200 yards north. Food supplies were inventoried and stored in animal-proof containers. Medical kits were positioned in each tent and the command center. As afternoon shifted toward evening, I noticed something that had been bothering me since arrival: the silence. Tropical environments typically hummed with insect noise, bird calls, the rustle of small animals. Here, the only sounds came from our own activities and the gentle lap of waves against the shore. "It's too quiet," Scott said, verbalizing my thoughts as he stopped beside me. No birds, no monkeys, no insects. Nothing. Emily overheard him. The Ami tribes reportedly avoid this island entirely. Indigenous peoples rarely abandon resource-rich environments without significant reason. "Like what?" Scott asked. "Disease, natural disasters, cultural taboos?" She shrugged. "Or something they fear more than hunger." The satellite phone beeped at 1900 precisely. I established connection with Wilson's operations center, reporting our successful landing and camp establishment. The transmission quality was excellent, no interference or dropped signals. "Preliminary observations suggest unusual ecological conditions," I reported. "Complete absence of visible wildlife and minimal evidence of marine ecosystem. All team members are healthy and equipment is functioning normally." "Acknowledged," came the response from Wilson's assistant. "Continue with established research protocols. Next check-in 0700 tomorrow." Darkness fell quickly, as it does in the tropics. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, bringing welcome relief from the day's heat. The generator hummed quietly, powering the perimeter lights and charging stations for equipment. The security team established watch rotations. Thomas first, then Scott, then me for the pre-dawn hours. I gathered everyone for a brief meeting before they retired to their tents. "Standard expedition protocols apply," I reminded them. "No solo excursions. Maintain radio contact, report anything unusual immediately, no matter how insignificant it might seem." David couldn't contain his enthusiasm despite the long day. "Initial botanical samples show unique cellular structures. 3 specimens I can't identify in any existing database. Tomorrow we push inland to the lower slopes." Sarah was more reserved. "I'll begin marine sampling at dawn. The unusual absence of visible ocean life requires investigation." Robert said nothing, staring out at the darkened water. When the meeting broke, he lingered. "Something bothering you?" I asked. He rubbed his face with one hand. "Probably nothing, just..." He gestured vaguely at the island. "Doesn't feel right. Places have personalities, you know. Spend enough time in the field, you develop a sense for it. And this one? Feels like it's watching us." He shook his head. "Forget it. Long day, unfamiliar environment. I'll run proper geological surveys tomorrow." He walked away, shoulders hunched against some invisible weight. I made a mental note to monitor his condition. Field expeditions often revealed psychological stress that remained hidden in normal environments. I checked the perimeter one final time before retreating to my tent. The island remained eerily silent. No wind rustled the leaves. No waves crashed against the shore. Even our generator seemed muted, as though the air absorbed sound rather than carrying it. In my tent, I laid out my equipment for the next day: sample bags, GPS unit, field notebook, sidearm. I checked the satellite phone's charge and placed it within arm's reach of my sleeping bag. Standard procedure, same as dozens of other expeditions. Yet as I settled in for sleep, that persistent feeling of wrongness remained. Not danger, at least not immediate danger, just the certainty that Yasur Island was fundamentally different from anywhere I'd been before. Spencer Wilson had paid $5 million for my expertise in navigating uncertain situations. As I closed my eyes, I wondered if even that sum was adequate compensation for whatever waited in the jungle beyond our camp. I woke 15 minutes before my scheduled watch. The luminous dial on my field watch read 2:45 in the morning. Thomas would be outside halfway through his shift. The tent fabric above me was perfectly still, no breeze off the water tonight. The camp generator hummed at quarter power, just enough to maintain perimeter lighting and essential equipment. I pulled on my boots, laced them methodically, and checked my sidearm before unzipping the tent. Thomas stood at the edge of our camp boundary, back rigid, head slightly cocked. Not the relaxed posture of routine surveillance. Something had him on alert. "All quiet?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He startled. Not a good sign from a man with his training. His hand moved instinctively toward his holstered weapon before recognition registered. "Didn't hear you approach." His eyes returned to scanning the tree line. And no, not quiet. I listened. The waves barely whispered against the shore. No insects. No nocturnal birds. Nothing. "What did you hear?" "Voices." Thomas shifted his weight, uncomfortable with his own assessment. "About 20 minutes ago, coming from there." He pointed to a section of jungle roughly 50 yards northeast of our position. "What did they say?" "Couldn't make it out. Not English. Not any language I know." He ran a hand across the back of his neck. Sounded like multiple speakers talking over each other. Then it stopped. I checked the motion sensors. All green indicators, no perimeter breaches. "You swept the area?" "Twice. Nothing." Thomas kept his eyes fixed on the trees. "I've done jungle ops in Southeast Asia, Central America, Philippines. Heard all kinds of wildlife. This wasn't that." I nodded, neither confirming nor dismissing his assessment. We'd been on the island less than 18 hours. Too early to draw conclusions. "I'll take over. Get some rest." Thomas hesitated, reluctant to leave his post while uncertain threats remained. Military conditioning ran deep. "I documented it in the log," he said finally. "Time bearing duration. Scott's due up at 400. He handed me the night vision monocular and walked back toward his tent. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, maintaining noise discipline even within camp. I settled into the watch position, a camp chair positioned to observe both the beach and the jungle edge. The perimeter lights created a 30-yard circle of visibility around our equipment. Beyond that, darkness. Sarah emerged from her tent at 3:18, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to not disturbing others. She nodded when she saw me, then walked toward the water's edge, stopping just before the gentle surf. I watched her silhouette against the starlit ocean for 8 minutes before she returned, her face taut. "Everything all right?" I asked. "I saw someone walking on the beach." Her voice was steady, clinical. "Approximately 100 yards south, walking north then. Gone." I stood. "When?" "Just now. Figured it must be one of us, but..." She glanced back at the row of occupied tents. "Everyone's accounted for." I grabbed my flashlight. "Show me." We walked the shoreline, keeping 10 feet between us and the water. Sarah pointed to the spot where she'd seen the figure. "Right there, moving like this." She mimicked a casual walking pace. "Not hurrying, just walking along the tide line." I swept my light across the wet sand. No footprints except our own leading from camp. The beam caught nothing but unbroken beach stretching into darkness. How clear was the sighting? Clear enough to see it was human-sized, walking upright. Sarah crossed her arms. Not clear enough for features or clothing details. I called out. It disappeared. I made a slow, methodical sweep with the light. Nothing disturbed the pristine sand. Could have been shadow play. Light refraction off the water. Sarah was too professional to argue, but her expression made clear she didn't believe that explanation. Neither did I. We returned to camp. Sarah hesitated outside her tent. "This island is strange, James." She kept her voice neutral, factual. "I've worked coastal research for 7 years. Never seen a shore ecosystem so sterile. No tide pools, no crabs, no gulls." "Document everything," I said. "We'll compare observations in the morning." She nodded and disappeared into her tent. I returned to my post, logging her report in the field notebook with exact time and coordinates. At 3:41, the first sound came from the jungle. Not voices exactly. Something between a whisper and wind through leaves, except there was no wind. It lasted 12 seconds. I marked it in the log. At 3:53, it happened again. Longer this time. 26 seconds. Different direction, coming from the northwest. Like multiple whispers layered over each other, creating a sound that almost resolved into words, but never quite did. The camp remained still. Only the generator's low hum competed with the not-quite voices. Movement near the tents drew my attention. Scott emerged in a rush, wearing only cargo pants, barefoot, his sidearm in hand but not raised. Proper trigger discipline, even half asleep. "Something outside my tent," he said, voice tight. "Brushed against the fabric. South side." I was already moving, flashlight in one hand, sidearm drawn but pointed down. We circled his tent. No footprints in the sand, no broken vegetation. The motion sensors remained green. "You sure it wasn't the wind?" I asked, knowing there wasn't any. Felt like fingers. Scott ran his hand along the tent's exterior. 3 distinct pressure points moving from here to here. He traced a path about 2 feet long across the nylon. I examined the area carefully. The sand around the tent showed only Scott's footprints from earlier. No animal tracks, no drag marks from something moving along the ground. "Let's check the perimeter again." We walked the entire boundary of our camp. 342 feet of secured space. Nothing breached, nothing disturbed. Scott remained tense, scanning constantly. "I didn't imagine it," he said as we completed the circuit. "I know." I kept my voice matter of fact. "Log it. Include the sensation details." When Scott returned to his tent, I noticed Emily standing in the shadow of the command center, notebook in hand. She'd been observing. "Collecting data?" I asked. She stepped forward. 4 separate incidents in under 2 hours, all auditory or visual phenomena without physical evidence. "Your assessment?" "Too early to tell." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "Could be sleep deprivation affecting perceptual accuracy. Could be atmospheric conditions creating unusual acoustics. Could be local wildlife with unfamiliar patterns. All reasonable hypotheses. None felt right." "The whispers," I said. "You heard them?" 3 distinct episodes. Emily's scientific precision was oddly reassuring. Varying duration, intensity, and directional origin. Consistent tonal quality. The sound came again, as if summoned by our discussion. Clearer this time, emanating from a point approximately 80 yards into the jungle, almost like my name, but stretched and distorted. Emily marked it in her notebook. 38 seconds, northeast bearing. I'd been trained to investigate unknown variables, identify, assess, neutralize if necessary, standing in the perimeter light, listening to disembodied whispers. Violated every operational instinct I'd developed. "I need to check it," I said. Emily frowned. "Standard protocol is to maintain the secure perimeter until daylight. Standard protocol assumes standard conditions." I retrieved my pack from beside the command center chair, checking the flashlight batteries and radio. "I'll stay within 50 yards of camp. Radio check every 5 minutes." Emily didn't argue further. She knew I wouldn't go beyond sensible risk parameters. I moved toward the northeast boundary, stepping through the perimeter light into darkness. The jungle wall loomed 20 yards ahead, dense and impenetrable in the night. I stopped at the edge, shining my light between massive tree trunks. The beam penetrated perhaps 15 feet before being swallowed by vegetation. The whisper came again. Closer now. My name, unmistakable this time. James. I froze, not because of the voice itself, but because I recognized it, a child's voice, a specific child's voice. My light caught movement between two trees, a small figure, partially obscured by undergrowth. I adjusted the beam, and there she stood. Clara, my daughter, 10 years old, wearing the yellow sundress from the photo on my desk at home. Her hair in the same uneven pigtails she'd insisted on doing herself that morning, the morning of the accident. 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days ago. The rational part of my brain cataloged the impossibility. Clara died on an operating table in Baltimore while I was deployed overseas. I didn't make it back in time. Her ashes sat in an oak box on my bookshelf. These were facts. Yet there she stood, 27 feet away, partially translucent, the foliage behind her visible through her form, but unmistakably Clara. "Daddy," she said, smiling that gap-toothed smile from 2nd grade. "I've been waiting for you." My hand holding the flashlight didn't shake. My breathing remained controlled. Training takes over when the mind can't process what it's experiencing. "You're not real," I said aloud. She tilted her head the way she always did when confused. "I feel real." She reached toward me, small fingers stretching across impossible distance. "I miss you." I stepped backward, hit the radio transmit button. "James checking in, all clear, northeast perimeter." Emily's voice came back immediately. "Confirmed. Find anything?" "Negative." My voice remained steady, professional. "Returning to base." Clara's face fell, the expression I'd seen whenever I'd had to leave for deployment. "Don't go, Daddy. Please don't leave me again." I blinked. When my eyes opened, she was gone. The space between the trees stood empty, my flashlight beam illuminating nothing but vegetation. I swept the area methodically, searching for any sign of what I'd seen. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no evidence anything had been there at all. The walk back to camp took 47 seconds. I counted each step, focusing on the numbers rather than what I'd just experienced. Emily waited at the perimeter, her notebook open. "What did you find?" she asked. "Nothing conclusive." I recorded the time in the log. Possible atmospheric distortion, creating visual artifacts. She studied my face. "James, what did you see?" I met her eyes, keeping my expression neutral. "I'll document it fully in the morning report." Emily held my gaze for 7 seconds, then nodded once. She understood the need for a comprehensive data collection before drawing conclusions. We were scientists, after all, even when confronted with the impossible. "Everyone should get what sleep they can," I said. "Dawn in 2 hours. We'll need clear heads." I didn't sleep, took over Scott's watch at 400 hours and stayed vigilant as the sky gradually lightened from black to deep blue to gray. The whispers didn't return. No figures walked the beach, nothing touched the tents, but as I waited for sunrise, I removed the worn photograph from my wallet. Clara at her birthday party, cake frosting smeared across her cheek, eyes bright with laughter. I'd carried it through 3 countries and countless missions. The island remained silent as first light touched the volcanic peak above us. Whatever waited in the jungle had said what it needed to say. For now. The horizon turned from black to gray as I finished the final perimeter check. Sunrise painted the volcanic peak in burnt orange while long shadows still covered our beach camp. I'd logged 17 separate anomalies during the night. Whispers, visual distortions, unexplained movement at the jungle's edge. 3 team members had independently reported encounters. I boiled water on the portable stove, measuring precisely 4 tablespoons of coffee into the French press. The familiar ritual helped order my thoughts. Behind me, tent zippers rasped open one by one as the team emerged. Emily approached first, field notebook tucked under her arm. Dark circles rimmed her eyes. She'd been awake most of the night, documenting. "You look like you haven't slept," I said, pouring her a cup. 2 hours, maybe." She accepted the coffee with both hands. I cross-referenced every recorded incident, mapped occurrence patterns. Something systematic is happening here. Thomas and Scott emerged together, moving with the deliberate precision of men forcing themselves to maintain protocols despite exhaustion. Their eyes scanned the tree line constantly. "Anything else after I went off watch?" Thomas asked. 3 more whisper incidents, no visual confirmations. I didn't mention Clara, not yet. The image of her standing between those trees remained too raw, too immediate. Sarah joined us, followed by Robert. Only David appeared well-rested, emerging from his tent with undiminished enthusiasm, already sorting sample containers in his collection kit. "Team meeting in 10 minutes, I announced. "Command tent. Full disclosure of all observations." The morning routine proceeded with mechanical efficiency, rehydrated breakfast packets, equipment checks, basic hygiene. No one ventured beyond the perimeter alone. No one spoke about what they'd experienced during the night. At 700 hours exactly, I placed the satellite call to Wilson's operations center. "Expedition Day 2 check-in," I reported. "All personnel accounted for. No injuries or equipment failures. Weather conditions stable." "Acknowledged," came the clipped response. "Any preliminary findings to report?" I paused, considering how to frame our experiences. "Several anomalous environmental observations under investigation. Nothing conclusive yet." "Understood. Next check-in at 1900 hours." The connection terminated with the same clinical efficiency as it had been established. Inside the command tent, I arranged 7 folding chairs in a circle. The team gathered, carrying notebooks, tablets, and coffee cups. I noted their positions, Emily and Sarah sitting together, Robert slightly removed, Thomas and Scott flanking the entrance. David leaned forward, eager despite the tension. "Let's begin with facts," I said. "Last night, multiple team members experienced unexplained phenomena. I need full disclosure from everyone." Thomas went first, describing the whispers he'd heard during his watch. His account was precise: timestamps, direction, duration. Scott followed with the incident at his tent, demonstrating with his hand how the pressure had felt against the fabric. Sarah described the figure walking along the beach. Female form, approximately 5'6", moving at normal walking pace before vanishing. Emily documented everything in her notebook, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When her turn came, she produced her tablet. "I've compiled all reported incidents." She displayed a time-stamped chart. 23 separate occurrences between 2200 and 0600 hours, predominantly auditory and visual. No physical evidence remains after each event. Robert cleared his throat. "I'm going to ask the obvious question. Are we sure this isn't just sleep deprivation and unfamiliar environment playing tricks?" "That was my first hypothesis," Emily replied. "But the consistency of the reports and multiple independent confirmations suggest otherwise." David couldn't contain himself any longer. "I think I know what's happening." He pulled out his own tablet, scrolling rapidly through botanical reference images. "This morning I found these growing just beyond our perimeter." He displayed photographs of small pale fungi clustered at the base of a tree. Taxonomically similar to Psilocybe aztecorum, but with structural differences. Many fungi in this family produce psychoactive compounds, specifically those that induce auditory and visual hallucinations. Emily leaned forward. "That actually aligns with my historical research." She switched to a different file on her tablet. "I've been comparing the limited records of this region with what we're experiencing." She turned the screen toward us. The document showed scanned pages from what appeared to be a ship's log, dated 1807. Dutch trading vessel documented an indigenous tribe living here 200 years ago. They called themselves the Vaatu, The tribe apparently vanished sometime between 1807 and 1825, when the next documented European contact found the island uninhabited. Thomas frowned. What happened to them? Unknown. But the Dutch records describe ritual practices involving plants the Vaatu believed allowed communication with deceased ancestors. Emily scrolled to another page. The log specifically mentions tribe members, speaking to those who had crossed the veil after consuming preparations from local flora. David clapped his hands together once. Exactly. The spores from these fungi could be airborne, water-soluble, or both. We're all being exposed to low doses of naturally occurring hallucinogens. Relief washed through me, a scientific explanation for what I'd seen. Not Clara, not really. Just chemical compounds interacting with memory and grief. That would explain the shared symptomatology, Emily said, and why the experiences seem more intense at night, when ambient spore concentration might increase with dropping temperatures. Robert nodded slowly. Testable hypothesis. I can collect air and soil samples, analyze for psychoactive compounds. I've been logging environmental data since we arrived, Sarah added. Temperature drops approximately 18 degrees after sunset. Relative humidity increases by 27%. Perfect conditions for fungal activity. The conversation continued, a comfortable retreat into scientific methodology. Hypotheses, testing protocols, equipment requirements, the familiar language of investigation rather than the unsettling reality of what we'd experienced. Finally, I cleared my throat. My turn. The tent fell silent. At approximately 0340, I investigated sounds at the northeast perimeter. I described moving to the jungle's edge, the whispers, the flashlight beam cutting through darkness. I observed what appeared to be a human figure standing 27 feet inside the tree line. Emily stopped writing. Did you recognize the figure? I met her eyes, then looked around at the others. Scientific explanations aside, they deserved complete disclosure from their team leader. Yes, my daughter, Clara. She died 3 years ago. No one spoke for 17 seconds. I continued, keeping my voice level. She appeared partially translucent, spoke my name, called me Daddy, used her exact voice. I paused, then disappeared when I blinked. David nodded vigorously. Classic hallucinogenic manifestation. The compounds typically amplify existing emotional pathways, especially trauma, loss, significant memories. You've all been very forthcoming, I said. Now I need to know. Did anyone else see someone they've lost? The silence stretched for 23 seconds. Thomas looked at his hands. My brother. Between the trees. Just for a second. Scott shook his head. Nothing like that. Just the pressure on my tent. Sarah stared at the ground. I didn't see anyone specific. Just the figure on the beach. Robert remained silent, arms crossed. The scientific explanation had created a foundation we could build on, something tangible we could address. But I noticed how Thomas's hand trembled slightly, how Robert wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, how Sarah's knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. Here's what we do, I said. We establish a more substantial base camp inland, away from the beach. If David's theory about the fungi is correct, changing our location might reduce exposure. Emily nodded. The Dutch records indicate the Vaatu settlement was near the freshwater source about half a mile inland. Higher ground, better defensive position, closer to research sites. Inland also provides better access to geological survey points, Robert added, seeming relieved by the change of subject. I need core samples from at least 3 elevations. We spent the next hour mapping our inland route and organizing equipment. The plan gave everyone purpose. Something concrete to focus on rather than what we'd experienced during the night. As we broke to prepare for the move, Sarah approached me outside the command tent. James, you should see this. Her voice remained professional, but but tension tightened the corners of her eyes. She led me 20 yards south, to where the jungle's edge met the beach. 3 trees stood in a rough triangle formation. She pointed to the trunk of the largest one. Carved into the bark were symbols, not fresh cuts, but old scars grown over with time. A circular pattern with lines radiating inward, surrounding what looked like a primitive face. The cuts were deep, deliberate, measuring approximately 4 inches across. "Found them this morning," Sarah said. "They're on all 3 trees. Same pattern, same positioning relative to the beach." I examined the carvings closely. Emily should document these. Already called her over. Sarah kept her voice low. "James, these markings are facing our camp, positioned at equal distances around our perimeter." I stepped back to confirm her observation. She was right. The 3 marked trees created boundary points around our position. Emily joined us, camera already in hand. She photographed the carvings from multiple angles, her expression growing more focused with each shot. "Recognize them?" I asked. "No." She adjusted her lens for a close-up. Not consistent with any documented Pacific symbolism I've studied. The circular pattern suggests celestial or cyclical representation, but the inward-facing lines are unusual. "Could be territorial markers," I suggested. "Or warnings," Sarah added quietly. Emily finished her documentation. "I'll compare these with any other markings we find inland. Might establish a pattern." By mid-morning, we had packed essential equipment and secured the remainder at our beach site. The plan called for a staged movement, establish the inland camp first, then retrieve additional gear as needed. I assigned Thomas to lead with GPS navigation, Scott to bring up the rear. Each team member carried their personal gear plus 1 case of research equipment. The load distribution put 47 pounds on each person, manageable for the half-mile trek through relatively flat terrain. Before departing, I surveyed our beach camp one final time. The pristine sand, the clear water, the silence. All beautiful, all wrong. "Keep visual contact at all times," I instructed the team. "Radio check every 5 minutes. Report anything unusual immediately." We moved in single file toward the tree line. The jungle opened before us, massive trunks creating natural columns, canopy filtering sunlight into dappled patterns on the undergrowth. Vines twisted around branches. Broad-leafed plants crowded the forest floor. I watched each team member's body language as we entered the trees. Thomas moved with heightened alertness, eyes scanning constantly. Emily documented everything with her camera. David practically vibrated with excitement at each new plant species. Robert and Sarah remained focused on the path ahead. Scott maintained perimeter awareness, turning frequently to check our 6. The scientific explanation had provided comfort, but not enough to fully dispel the tension. Something about Yasur Island had changed us all in less than 24 hours. And as I followed my team deeper into the jungle, I couldn't shake the memory of Clara's face, or the feeling that we were being watched by something that knew exactly what we feared most. The jungle path opened into a natural clearing after 37 minutes of hiking. Overhead, the canopy framed a perfect circle of blue sky. The clearing measured roughly 60 feet across, with packed earth instead of the rich loam we'd trudged through. What stopped us wasn't the clearing itself, but what occupied it. Stone structures rose from the ground in deliberate formations, not buildings, but arrangements too precise to be natural. 7 stone pillars, each approximately 4 feet tall, formed a wide arc across the northern edge. At the center stood a flat, altar-like slab, 8 feet long and waist-high. Emily moved forward, camera already documenting. Va'atu ceremonial site. Has to be. Robert set down his equipment case, wiping sweat from his forehead. Good drainage here, elevated 6 inches above the surrounding terrain. Solid ground for base camp. We established a perimeter 20 feet back from the nearest stone structures, setting up the command tent first, then arranging sleeping quarters in a defensive semicircle. The routine felt familiar, calming, measuring distances, securing equipment, establishing communication protocols, normal procedures in an abnormal place. 32 degrees elevation from jungle floor to clearing, Thomas reported, checking his handheld GPS. Fresh water source confirmed 80 yards northeast. No visible wildlife. I logged his report in the field notebook while supervising equipment placement. Sarah organized our medical supplies within easy reach of all tents. Scott established motion sensors at 15-yard intervals surrounding camp. Emily photographed and measured each stone structure, moving methodically around the clearing. "These aren't random," she called, kneeling beside one of the pillars. "They're positioned according to celestial alignment. This central stone would catch the rising sun during summer solstice." David had already wandered to the edge of the clearing, plastic collection bags in hand. His enthusiasm contrasted sharply with our measured movements. "James, you need to see this." He gestured emphatically from the jungle's edge. I crossed to where he stood, noting the soil transition from cleared ground to forest floor. A perfect line, as if the jungle growth respected some invisible boundary. David pointed to a cluster of mushrooms growing at the base of a massive tree. They stood 4 inches tall with pale stems and flat, almost translucent caps. Similar to what I showed you this morning, but more mature specimens. David knelt, already pulling on latex gloves. "The structure suggests psychoactive properties, but I've never seen this specific morphology documented anywhere." "Remember your own theory," I reminded him. "These could be causing our experiences." "Exactly why I need samples." He carefully extracted one mushroom, placing it in a collection vial. "If these produce compounds similar to psilocybin but with different molecular structure, we could be looking at an entirely new class of neurological agents." I left him to his work, returning to help complete camp setup. By 1300 hours, we had established a functional base, tents secured, communications equipment tested, solar chargers deployed to supplement generator power. The team gathered under the command canopy for lunch and task assignments. "We maintain standard buddy system protocols," I instructed, spreading the topographical map across our folding table. "No one goes anywhere alone. Radio check-ins every 15 minutes when away from base." Emily had overlaid her cultural research onto the map, marking the ceremonial site and potential exploration zones. "The stone formations suggest this was the Va-2 Cultural Center," she explained. "If we find additional structures, we might establish their settlement pattern." Robert studied the geological markings. "I need core samples from these 3 points to assess volcanic stability and mineral composition." Sarah pointed to the freshwater stream northeast of our position. "I'll catalog aquatic specimens there. Maybe we'll actually find something alive in the water this time." Thomas and Scott would establish an expanded security perimeter while monitoring our existing equipment. Tasks assigned, the team dispersed to their specific projects. I remained at the command center, documenting our observations and updating the expedition log. The quiet efficiency of everyone's movements belied the tension lingering from last night's experiences. We'd embraced David's scientific explanation, but I noticed how everyone's eyes still darted toward unexpected sounds. At 14:43, the scream shattered the afternoon quiet. I was running before I consciously processed the sound, following it to the northwestern edge of the clearing where David had been collecting specimens. Thomas converged from the opposite direction, weapon drawn but pointed safely downward. David lay on his back, body convulsing violently against the ground. White foam bubbled from his mouth. His collection kit lay scattered around him, sample vials rolling across the uneven soil. I dropped to my knees beside him, recognizing signs of acute neurotoxin exposure. "Sarah! Medical emergency, northwest perimeter." Thomas kept his weapon ready, scanning the surrounding jungle while I turned David onto his side to prevent aspiration. His convulsions intensified, spine arching at an impossible angle. His eyes had rolled back, showing only whites beneath fluttering lids. Sarah arrived 17 seconds later, medical kit already open. She checked David's airway, then his pulse. Tachycardia, over 180. Her voice remained clinical despite the urgency. She prepared a syringe of anticonvulsant. Likely toxic exposure. Did you see what he touched? No. Found him like this. She administered the injection into David's thigh through his pants leg. The convulsions continued unabated. His breathing became shallow, irregular. Emily appeared at the edge of the gathering team members, her face draining of color. What happened? Unknown exposure, Sarah replied, now checking David's oxygen levels with a small monitor. 72% and dropping. She prepared an epinephrine injection next, standard protocol for anaphylactic responses. I cleared space around David, keeping his airway positioned while Sarah worked. The convulsions stopped abruptly, not the gradual relaxation of successful treatment. An immediate cessation that experienced field medics recognize instantly. Sarah's fingers pressed against David's carotid artery. 10 seconds, 20. No pulse. She immediately began chest compressions, her movements precise. Bag in my kit. Set up for intubation. I retrieved the emergency airway kit, preparing the equipment with practiced motions. We'd trained for field emergencies dozens of times. The procedures were automatic, even as I registered what was happening. David was dying. Had died, technically. We were attempting resuscitation. Sarah continued compressions for 7 minutes. I maintained the ambubag ventilation after she established an airway. We rotated compression duties once, administered a second epinephrine dose, applied the portable defibrillator from the emergency kit. No response. At 15:07, Sarah sat back on her heels, face slick with sweat. Time of death, 15:07. The clearing fell silent except for our heavy breathing from the resuscitation efforts. The entire team had gathered, standing in a loose circle around David's body. No one spoke for 43 seconds. Robert broke the silence. What the hell happened? I examined the area immediately surrounding David's body. His collection tools lay where they had fallen. Several sample bags contained plant specimens. One open vial had spilled pale fungi across the ground. Don't touch anything, I ordered, pulling on gloves from Sarah's kit. Nobody touches any plant life without full protective equipment. Period. Emily knelt beside David's research journal, which had fallen open to his last entry. She carefully turned pages with a pencil eraser, not touching the paper directly. He documented collecting 7 fungi specimens, she read. Structurally similar to psilocybe, but with pronounced differences in cap formation and gill pattern. Manual handling inadvisable until chemical properties confirmed. That's his last entry. I examined David's hands. The latex gloves were intact, but a small tear was visible on the right thumb. Barely a 1/4-inch rip, but enough for direct skin contact with whatever he'd handled. Rapid onset neurotoxin, Sarah concluded, packing her medical supplies with mechanical precision. Her clinical demeanor provided stability in the chaos. From absorption through the skin, nothing in our medical kit could have countered something that aggressive. We needed to contain the situation, secure David's body, document everything, preserve evidence. I assigned tasks with detached efficiency, falling back on protocols when emotions threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Thomas Scott, establish a perimeter around this collection area. Mark it as contaminated. Emily, document everything before we move anything. Sarah, prepare the body for transport back to the beach site. Robert stood slightly apart, arms crossed tightly across his chest. This wasn't in the contract, he muttered. None of this was in the contract, I replied. We constructed a stretcher from tent poles and canvas, wrapped David's body in his sleeping bag, documented the exact location and circumstances with photographs and GPS coordinates. The procedures provided structure, purpose. Better than dwelling on the fact that someone who had been excitedly collecting samples 30 minutes ago was now dead. By 1600 hours, we had transported David's body back to camp and secured it in a separate tent. The team gathered again under the command canopy, faces drawn, movements stiff. "We need to notify Wilson," Emily said. I checked my watch. 3 hours until scheduled check-in. We'll report then. 3 hours? Scott's voice rose. A man just died. We need immediate extraction. And we'll request it during check-in, I replied evenly. The satellite phone is for scheduled communication unless we activate the emergency protocol, which triggers an automatic military response. We need to be precise about what we're dealing with before we make that call. The pragmatic approach steadied the group. We reviewed what we knew. David had apparently been exposed to an unknown toxin from a fungus species. The exposure occurred despite protective gloves, suggesting extreme potency. The clearness of these facts provided temporary comfort against the larger implications. I established new safety protocols. No one leaves camp alone. No specimen collection without full protective gear. Hourly radio check-ins even within visual range of camp. The team accepted these guidelines without argument, the reality of David's death eliminating any potential resistance. At 17:32, Thomas reported movement at the southwestern perimeter. Something in the trees, humanoid, about 30 yards out. Scott joined him immediately. I followed, bringing binoculars from the command tent. There, Thomas pointed toward a dense section of foliage, between those two trunks with the vines. I raised the binoculars, adjusting focus. Nothing but leaves and shadows. It was there, Thomas insisted. His voice contained an edge I hadn't heard before. Black hair, army jacket, my brother's jacket. I lowered the binoculars slowly. Your brother. Thomas kept staring at the spot, body rigid. Jeff, standing right there watching me. Scott exchanged a look with me. We both recognized the escalation from last night's experiences. Thomas, remember David's theory about the fungi, I said carefully. Airborne spores affecting perception. What you're seeing, I know what I'm seeing. Thomas's voice hardened. That's Jeff. Same as he looked the day before Fallujah. He turned toward me, eyes wide. He's trying to tell me something. There's nothing there, man, Scott said, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Let's get back to camp. Thomas shrugged off Scott's hand violently. Don't tell me what I see. He's right there. He raised his voice, calling toward the trees. Jeff, I'm here. I motioned for Scott to maintain distance while I tried a different approach. Thomas, I saw my daughter last night by the beach, but she wasn't really there. This is different, Thomas insisted. He's trying to show me something. He took 3 steps toward the jungle before I blocked his path. Nobody leaves camp, I reminded him, especially not chasing something only you can see. For a moment, I thought he might try to push past me. His body tensed, hands clenching. Then his eyes shifted from my face back to the trees. He's walking away. Thomas whispered, Jeff, wait. Before either of us could react, Thomas bolted past me, sprinting toward the jungle line. I shouted after him, already in pursuit, but he had a 7-second head start and moved with desperate speed. Scott, with me, I called, drawing my sidearm. Not to use against Thomas, but against whatever might lurk in the jungle beyond our secured perimeter. We crashed through the undergrowth, following the path of broken vegetation Thomas left behind. His footprints showed in the soft soil, running hard, not even trying to hide his trail. I counted distance as we moved. 50 yards from perimeter, 70, 100. Thomas, I called, keeping my voice controlled despite my racing pulse. Thomas, respond. The radio crackled. Emily's voice came through with practiced calm. Movement on your 3 o'clock, approximately 20 yards ahead. We adjusted course, following her direction. Scott took flanking position, moving with combat precision despite the uneven terrain. We found Thomas's pack first, discarded beside a fallen log, then his radio 10 feet further along. His boot prints continued up a steep incline toward a rocky outcropping. "He's climbing," Scott said, pointing to disturbed moss and freshly exposed soil on the nearly vertical face. The outcropping rose approximately 40 feet, forming a small cliff face, too steep for safe ascent without proper equipment, especially in fading light. Thomas's desperation had apparently overwhelmed his training. "Thomas," I called again, louder this time. "Hold position, we're coming up." No response. I estimated sunset in approximately 22 minutes. Night climbing would be suicidal on unfamiliar terrain. "I'm going up," I decided, securing my sidearm and testing the first handholds. "Radio Emily. Tell her our position and situation." Scott nodded, already making the call. I began the climb, testing each hold before committing my weight. The rock face was damp with moss and loose in places, requiring careful navigation. I counted my progress in feet. 10, 15, 25. Halfway up, I heard Thomas's voice from above. "Jeff, I'm sorry. I should have been there." I increased my pace, ignoring the burning in my forearms. "Thomas, stay back from the edge." 35 feet up. I could see the top of the outcropping now, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The scream stopped me cold, not fear or pain, a howl of pure anguish that echoed across the jungle canopy. Then silence. I reached the top 17 seconds later, pulling myself over the edge onto a flat rock surface approximately 10 feet wide. Thomas wasn't there. The opposite side of the outcropping dropped away sharply, a 60-foot fall to a rock-strewn gully below. I approached carefully, already knowing what I would find. Thomas's broken body lay sprawled across the rocks, limbs at unnatural angles, a dark stain spreading beneath him. "Scott," I called down to where he waited at the base of the cliff. "East side." He went over. Scott's acknowledgement came as a single word through the radio. He was already moving to circle the outcropping. I made my way back down, more careful now that urgency had been replaced with grim certainty. No one survived a fall like that. We reached Thomas's body together, approaching from different sides of the gully. The last daylight painted everything in muted reds and purples. Scott checked for pulse out of protocol, though the catastrophic head trauma made survival impossible. "He's gone," Scott confirmed quietly. I surveyed our surroundings, marking our position on the GPS unit. "We can't move him in the dark. Too dangerous. We'll return at first light with proper equipment." Scott nodded, his professional demeanor intact despite losing a teammate he'd worked with for years. We marked the location with a chemical light stick and began the careful journey back to camp, flashlights illuminating our path through deepening darkness. Emily met us at the perimeter, her notebook absent for once. "Thomas?" "Dead," I said simply. "Fell from the cliff face. We'll recover his body tomorrow." The news rippled through the remaining team members gathered at the command tent. 2 deaths in less than 4 hours. Both defied easy explanation. Toxic fungi with impossible potency, a trained military contractor chasing hallucinations to his death. "It's the island," Robert said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. "This place is wrong." No one argued with him. Emily spread her research materials across the table. The Dutch records mentioned the Vaatu performing rituals to communicate with their dead. What if that's what's happening to us? Not just hallucinations from fungi. Something more fundamental about this place. "That's not science," Sarah objected, though her voice lacked conviction. "Neither is what we've experienced," Emily countered. David's theory about hallucinogenic fungi made sense this morning. Now he's dead. Thomas saw his brother and followed him off a cliff. These aren't random events. Robert set down his cup with deliberate care. "I've been seeing my son all day." The statement landed heavily in the silence. We all turned toward him. Just glimpses at the edge of my vision. Robert stared at his hands, standing between trees, watching me from behind rocks. Jimmy. He was 8 when the cancer took him. I thought of Clara standing in the jungle darkness, the perfect details of her face, her voice. Not random hallucination, but precise recreation of specific loss. "When's our check-in?" Scott asked, checking his watch. 1900, I confirmed. 26 minutes from now. The decision crystallized with clear, cold certainty. "We're evacuating tomorrow morning, first light." No one objected. "Tonight we secure the camp. Double the perimeter guards. No one goes anywhere alone, even to the latrines." I laid out the plan methodically. "At first light, we recover Thomas's body, collect our essential equipment and samples, and return to the beach. I'll fly us out immediately." Emily gathered her research materials. "We need to document everything before we leave. The stone structures, the carvings, any evidence explaining what's happening." "Agreed, but our priority is getting off this island alive." I looked at each remaining team member in turn. "The satellite call will request extraction authorization from Wilson. If he refuses, we're leaving anyway." The simplicity of the plan provided structure amid chaos. Tasks were assigned, watch rotations established, equipment prioritized for transport. As the others dispersed to their duties, Emily remained beside me at the command table. "The Dutch records," she said quietly. "They didn't just describe the Vaatu communicating with their dead. They documented the tribe's extinction. Nearly 200 people, gone within 18 years of European contact." "Disease?" I asked. "Warfare." She shook her head. "The final entries describe Vaatu members walking into the jungle individually, following voices, never returning." I thought of Thomas sprinting toward his brother's ghost without hesitation or self-preservation. "We leave at first light," I repeated. As night settled fully over the camp, I positioned myself at the perimeter, watching the tree line. Somewhere in that darkness, David's body lay covered in a tent, while Thomas's broken form remained on distant rocks. Morning arrived with fog clinging to the tree line. I'd been awake since 4:15, checking perimeter sensors and documenting overnight incidents. 6 separate whisper events. 2 visual anomalies at the western edge. Nothing that approached our defensive line. The satellite call to Wilson's operations center had gone as expected. Clinical acknowledgement of our situation, promised consultation with Wilson about extraction options, and instructions to maintain position until further orders. I'd already decided we wouldn't wait. Emily sat at the command table, cross-referencing her notes with the Dutch trading records. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Anything useful?" I asked, pouring coffee into her empty cup. "Patterns," she replied without looking up. "The Vaatu didn't just disappear. They followed their dead into the jungle, one by one." Scott approached from his watch position, movements precise but eyes darting toward shadows between trees. His right hand never strayed far from his holstered sidearm. "Perimeter secure," he reported mechanically. "No movement since 0400. I noted the slight tremor in his fingers, the sheen of sweat despite the cool morning air. "Get some rest before we move out. I need you sharp." He nodded but remained standing at the edge of the command area, staring at something over my left shoulder. "Scott?" His eyes didn't shift. "She's here again." The hair on my neck rose. I turned slowly, following his gaze to empty space between 2 supply crates. "There's nothing there," I said quietly. "Jennifer." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Standing right there, watching me." I stepped closer, keeping my movements deliberate. "Who's Jennifer?" A tear tracked down his weathered cheek. "Kandahar, 2 years ago. She was our translator, 19 years old." His hand drifted toward his weapon. "I told her the route was clear." Emily slowly closed her notebook, watching the interaction with careful attention. "Scott," I kept my voice level. "Remember what we discussed about the island? What you're seeing isn't real. She looks real." His eyes tracked something I couldn't see. "Blood on her hijab," same as when the IED. He choked on the words. I promised her family she'd be safe. I positioned myself between Scott and his hallucination. Focus on me. We're evacuating soon. I need you present. For 3 seconds, his eyes met mine. Then they slid past again, widening with fresh horror. No, Jen, don't show me that, please. His breathing accelerated. I know it was my fault, I know. I keyed my radio. Sarah, medical assistance at command tent, now. Scott's hand closed around his sidearm grip. I measured the distance between us, 7 feet, too far to safely intervene if he drew. Scott, listen to me. I need you to move away from your weapon. He didn't seem to hear. I'm sorry, Jen. I'm so sorry. Tears flowed freely now. I should have checked the route myself. I should have been in that vehicle. Sarah appeared at the tent entrance, medical kit in hand. I signaled her to wait. Tell me about Jennifer, I said, taking one careful step forward. What was she like? The question seemed to momentarily break through. Scott blinked, focused on me again. Smart. Spoke 4 languages. Wanted to study in America after her contract. She sounds remarkable. She was. His hand relaxed slightly on his weapon. She trusted me. I took another step. 5 feet now. The island is using your grief, Scott. Whatever you're seeing isn't Jennifer. It's something else wearing her face. His eyes darted back to the empty space. She's crying now. Says I abandoned her. You didn't abandon her. You're honoring her by surviving. 4 feet between us, almost close enough to reach his weapon if needed. Step away from the hallucination. Come with us to the beach. For 7 heartbeats, I thought I'd reached him. His hand fell away from his sidearm. His shoulders straightened. Then he screamed. No, get away from her. His weapon cleared the holster in one fluid motion. 3 shots cracked across the clearing. Precise, controlled fire at the empty space between supply crates. Robert emerged from his tent at the sound, eyes wide. What the hell? Get down! I shouted, already moving towards Scott, but I was 3 seconds too late. Scott's expression shifted from rage to horror as he stared at the space where he'd fired. No, Jen, not again. His voice broke. I can't fail you twice. The weapon swung upward in one smooth motion. Scott! I lunged forward. The 4th shot echoed differently from the first 3. Scott collapsed backward, the entry wound centered perfectly beneath his chin. The exit wound sprayed across the supply crates behind him. His body hit the ground with a final, hollow thud. Silence spread across the camp for 12 seconds. I moved to Scott first, checking for pulse out of procedure rather than hope. Nothing. His eyes stared upward, finally free from whatever torment he'd been seeing. Secure his weapon, I told Robert, who stood frozen at the edge of the clearing. Sarah approached cautiously, medical kit held loosely at her side. There's nothing I can do. I know. I closed Scott's eyes with my palm. 3rd death in less than 24 hours. Emily had already begun documenting the scene, her camera clicking methodically. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. Did he say who Jennifer was? Translator in Afghanistan, killed by an IED on his watch. I surveyed the camp, noting positions. Robert had collected Scott's weapon and cleared the chamber. Sarah knelt beside the body, mechanically checking vital signs she knew weren't there. He blamed himself. Emily lowered her camera. David, Thomas, now Scott, all followed or confronted manifestations of people they'd lost. Guilt, Robert said quietly from across the clearing. That's the common factor. Not just grief, but guilt. I nodded slowly. Emily returned to her notes, flipping pages with increasing urgency. The Dutch records. The captain wrote that the Vaatu believed the island itself was alive, not just spiritually, but literally sentient. She found the page she wanted. Here. The elders speak of the island as hungry. It consumes shame and regret, feeds on the guilt of men. Robert set Scott's weapon on the command table, his movements deliberate. That's not possible. 3 dead men suggest otherwise, Sarah said, closing her kit. I checked my watch. 7:23. We need to move. Now. Get only what you can carry. We leave for the beach in 15 minutes. The evacuation plan sharpened everyone's focus. Grief would come later, after survival. Emily packed her research materials and camera equipment. Sarah gathered the medical supplies. I transferred essential navigation tools and communications gear to my pack. Robert worked beside me, securing water containers and emergency rations. His movements were methodical, but his eyes kept drifting toward the jungle edge. You doing okay? I asked quietly. He nodded without looking at me. Fine. Robert. He stopped, hands resting on the supply case. I keep seeing Jimmy, my son. The confession hung in the air between us. How long has he been appearing? I kept my voice neutral, professional. Since yesterday afternoon, just glimpses. Robert's knuckles whitened against the plastic case, standing between trees, watching me from the edge of the clearing. I thought of Clara in the darkness, the perfect details of her face. You said he died of cancer. Leukemia, 8 years old. Robert finally met my eyes. I never told anyone the rest of it. Emily had paused her packing, listening while pretending not to. You don't have to tell us now, I said. Maybe I do. Robert's voice dropped lower. The first symptoms showed up 6 months before diagnosis. Bruising, fatigue. I thought he was just being lazy. Told him to toughen up. His eyes glistened. By the time we got him to a specialist, the cancer was everywhere. I recognized the pattern now. The guilt, the shame, the perfect target for whatever hunted us. It wasn't your fault, Emily said quietly. You couldn't have known. A better father would have. Robert's attention shifted to something behind me. His expression softened. He's standing right there, wearing his baseball uniform. I turned, seeing only empty space. Robert, listen to me. What you're seeing isn't your son. It's using his memory against you. He looks so real. Robert's voice became distant. He's smiling. Wants to show me something by the stones. Sarah finished packing the medical supplies. We need to leave, now. I positioned myself directly in front of Robert, breaking his line of sight. Focus on me. We're evacuating. I need you with us. For 2 seconds, he seemed... We kept a sustainable pace through the thickening jungle. 2.7 miles to the beach. Approximately 2 hours at normal hiking speed. But nothing about this was normal. The whispers started 23 minutes into our march. Distant at first, then closer. Familiar voices calling from between trees. I checked my watch. 8:15 in the morning. Full daylight, which should have been reassuring. It wasn't. Keep moving, I told Emily and Sarah. Eyes forward. Focus on the trail. The undergrowth grew denser as we descended from the plateau. Broad-leaved plants slapped against our legs. Fallen logs created obstacles we needed to climb over or detour around. I tracked our progress using the GPS unit, marking each quarter mile with quiet announcements to maintain a sense of measured progress. Stay 5 feet apart, I instructed. Close enough to help each other, far enough not to tangle if someone falls. Emily limped slightly but maintained pace, her backpack stuffed with research materials and camera equipment. Sarah followed 15 feet behind us, her movements mechanical. She hadn't spoken since we left camp. 1 mile down, I announced at 8:47, maintaining course southeast. The whispers grew more distinct. A child's laughter from my left, a man's voice calling Sarah's name from the right. I ignored them, focusing on the trail markers I'd cut during our inbound journey. They're getting louder, Emily said, her voice tight with controlled fear. It's not real, I reminded her. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, it's the island using memories against us. Behind us, Sarah stumbled over an exposed root. When I turned to check on her, she was staring into the dense foliage to our west. "Sarah, eyes forward," I called. She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly, listening to something only she could hear. I backtracked the 7 steps to reach her. "Sarah, we need to keep moving." "Do you hear that?" she asked, still staring into the jungle. "Don't engage with it," I said firmly. "Remember what happened to the others." She blinked, focusing on my face for a moment. "Right. Sorry." We continued forward. The path narrowed as we entered an area of twisted vines and thorny bushes. I used my machete to clear the worst sections, measuring each swing to conserve energy while maintaining forward momentum. At 9:22, Emily caught her boot on a hidden root and pitched forward. I caught her arm before she hit the ground, but her ankle twisted beneath her. She gasped in pain. "How bad?" I asked, helping her to a fallen log. Emily rotated her ankle carefully, wincing. "Not broken. Sprained, maybe." She pushed herself up, testing weight on it. "I can walk." Her face paled when she put full pressure on it, but she didn't complain. I noted the swelling already visible above her boot top. "We'll slow our pace," I decided. Better to reach the beach intact than risk further injury. Sarah had stopped 10 feet behind us, staring at a gap between 2 massive banyan trees. Her posture had changed, head cocked to one side, body leaning slightly forward. "I hear splashing," she said, her voice oddly distant. I immediately moved to her side. "Sarah, focus on me." She didn't turn. "That's Maggie. At the lake." Emily exchanged a glance with me, recognition flickering in her eyes. Sarah had mentioned a sister who drowned. "Sarah," I spoke firmly, positioning myself directly in her line of sight. "What you're hearing isn't real. The island is using your memories." "It sounds just like her." Sarah's eyes were wide, seeing something beyond the physical jungle around us. "She's calling for help." I grabbed her arm. "We need to keep moving. The beach is 1.6 miles ahead." She pulled away with surprising strength. "You don't understand. She's in the water." Her voice broke. "She's drowning again." Emily limped closer, her research instincts overriding caution. "Sarah, you told us your sister's death was an accident, that you didn't blame yourself." Sarah laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "What else would I say? That I was supposed to be watching her? That I was on the phone with my boyfriend instead of paying attention?" Her eyes fixed on the space between trees. "I heard her call for help. I just didn't react fast enough." I recognized the escalating pattern from the others. The confession, the justification, the surrender to guilt. "Sarah, listen to me." I kept my voice level, authoritative. "What you're seeing isn't your sister. It's using her memory to trap you. She's right there." Sarah's expression softened into wonder. 16 years old, just like the day at the lake. She took a step toward the trees. "She's saying she forgives me." Emily tried a different approach. "What does the scientific data tell you, Sarah? There's no lake here, no physical presence. You're experiencing a hallucination triggered by environmental factors." For a moment, Sarah's professional training seemed to break through. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Emily's face. "Hallucination," she repeated. "Right, toxic exposure, fungal spores." "Exactly." I eased my grip on her arm. "We need to reach the beach. Get off this island." Sarah nodded, then froze. Her eyes widened in pure terror. "No! Maggie, grab my hand!" She lunged forward, breaking my grip. "I can save you this time." "Sarah, stop!" I lunged after her, but she was already sprinting between the banyan trees. "She's going under!" Sarah screamed, crashing through the underbrush. I followed. machete cutting a path through vines and branches. Emily called from behind, her injured ankle preventing her from keeping pace. I glimpsed Sarah 20 yards ahead, running with the desperate speed of someone trying to prevent a tragedy. "Sarah!" I shouted. "There's no water. There's no lake." She either didn't hear or didn't care. The jungle thickened around us, forcing me to slow to avoid injury. I lost sight of her for 17 seconds, following only the sound of breaking branches and her increasingly frantic calls. When I broke through into a small clearing, Sarah stood at its center, arms outstretched toward nothing. Her face showed pure anguish. "I can't reach you," she sobbed. "Maggie, please." I approached carefully, measuring each step. "Sarah, take my hand. We're going to walk back to the trail together." She didn't acknowledge me. Her body suddenly stiffened, head tilting as if listening. "Yes," she whispered. "I understand now." Warning signals flared through my mind, the same phrase Thomas had used before his fatal climb. "Sarah, don't." She turned toward me, tears streaking her face. "She needs me to come to her. I have to go into the water." "There is no water," I said firmly, reaching for her arm again. She twisted away with unexpected agility. "You don't see it, but I do. The lake. It's right there." She pointed to empty air. "Maggie's waiting for me." Before I could stop her, Sarah bolted across the clearing toward a tangle of vines and roots at its edge. I pursued immediately, but she had a 7-yard head start. She reached the vegetation boundary and disappeared as if swallowed by the jungle itself. One moment visible, the next gone completely. I reached the spot 4 seconds later. Where Sarah had passed, I found only a sheer drop, a natural sinkhole approximately 40 feet deep with jagged rock formations at its bottom. The vegetation had concealed the edge completely. Sarah lay motionless at the bottom, body twisted at unnatural angles across the rocks. Even from this height, I could see the extensive trauma. No one survived a fall like that onto those surfaces. "Sarah!" Emily's voice called from behind me. She limped into the clearing, breathing heavily from exertion. I turned, blocking her view of the sinkhole. "She's gone." Emily read my expression immediately. "How?" "Hidden drop. She ran straight into it." I glanced back at the deadly pit. At least it was quick. Emily's scientific detachment cracked slightly. We're the only ones left. I checked my GPS unit. 1.4 miles to the beach. We need to keep moving. "We can't just leave her there." Emily stared past me toward the sinkhole. "We have no retrieval equipment, no time." I made the call with cold practicality. "We document the coordinates. Report it during extraction." Emily's face showed conflict between human emotion and survival necessity. Finally, she nodded. "Let me at least take pictures of the site." I allowed 30 seconds for documentation. Emily photographed the sinkhole and surroundings, logging the exact coordinates in her notebook with mechanical precision. Her hands trembled slightly, but her movements remained methodical. "We stay on the main trail," I said when she finished. "No deviations, no matter what we hear or see." Emily adjusted her pack, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. "The island's closing in on us. It knows we're trying to escape." I didn't argue with her assessment. The whispers had grown more insistent since Sarah's death, voices calling from every direction, movement glimpsed between trees that vanished when directly observed. We maintained forward progress despite Emily's injury. I offered my shoulder for support on the steeper sections, measuring our pace against the GPS distance remaining. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy at an increasingly sharp angle. Shadows lengthened around us. At 4:37, I spotted a break in the vegetation ahead. The tree line. Beach should be just beyond it. Emily's face showed relief mingled with exhaustion. "We're going to make it." I didn't share her optimism vocally. 5 people had died believing that same thing. The whispers intensified as we approached the final stretch of jungle. Not just whispers now. Distinct voices speaking clearly from just behind trees, from shadows pooling between roots. "Daddy? Why are you leaving me here alone?" Clara's voice, perfect inflection, the exact tone she used when afraid of the dark. I kept walking. "You promised you'd never leave me again." Her voice cracked with hurt. "You promised after the divorce you'd always be there." 10 more yards to the tree line. I focused on Emily's labored breathing beside me, the physical reality of our movement forward. "Dr. Johnson," a man's voice now addressing Emily, "another disappointment. I expected better from you." Emily stumbled slightly. Her face paled. "Your father?" I asked without breaking stride. She nodded once, jaw tightening. "Don't listen," I advised. "Keep moving." 7 yards to the clearing. The voices multiplied, overlapping. Sarah calling for help from behind us. Thomas asking why we left him on the rocks. Robert accusing us of abandoning him at the stone circle. "The price of failure was always too high for you, wasn't it?" The man's voice grew louder, directed at Emily. "Never quite good enough for the Johnson name." Emily's pace faltered. "He died disappointed in me," she whispered. "Changed his will a week before the stroke. Cut me out completely." "Emily," I gripped her arm firmly. "The island is using that against you. Don't engage." 5 yards from the tree line. Through gaps in the foliage, I glimpsed open beach beyond. The Cessna floated where we'd left it, tethered to the shore. The voices crescendoed around us. Not just sound anymore. Translucent figures materialized between trees. Clara stepped directly into our path, her yellow sundress bright against the darkening jungle. Her face, previously innocent and pleading, twisted into something malevolent. Her eyes darkened to empty sockets. Her smile stretched too wide across her face. "Stay with me forever, Daddy," she said, her voice distorting into multiple overlapping tones. Everyone else did. I walked through the apparition, feeling cold pressure like walking through freezing mist. Clara's image dissolved, then reformed behind us. "You can't leave," she said, her voice no longer just hers, but a composite of many. "The island needs you." Emily gasped beside me. I turned to see her staring at an elderly man in academic robes standing directly in our path. His stern face showed disappointment and contempt. "Running away again, Emily?" the apparition asked. "Just like you ran from real scholarship, from your responsibilities to the family legacy." Emily stopped walking. "Dad, don't answer it," I warned, tugging her forward. "It's not him." The figure's features shifted subtly, becoming gaunt, skull-like beneath translucent skin. "You know why I changed the will," it said. "You were never worthy of the Johnson name." Emily's breathing quickened, her eyes fixed on the apparition with decades of unresolved hurt. "I did everything you asked," she whispered. "It was never enough." I positioned myself between Emily and the figure. "Look at me, not at that thing." Her eyes reluctantly met mine. "The others died because they couldn't separate memory from manipulation," I said firmly. "Whatever guilt you carry about your father, the island is weaponizing it." The beach lay just 3 yards ahead. Sunset colors painted the ocean beyond in deep oranges and purples. Night would fall within 30 minutes. "Emily, listen to me." I gripped both her shoulders. "The key is honesty, not denial. Acknowledge your pain. Don't hide from it." Her father's apparition circled us, its movements unnatural, jerky. "Stay with me, Emily. We have so much to discuss about your failures." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "The guilt feeds it," she whispered. "The buried trauma." "Exactly." I nodded toward the beach. 3 more yards. "Talk to me about your father while we walk." Emily took a deep breath. "He was brilliant," demanding. Nothing I did ever measured up. Each word seemed to physically pain her. When I chose cultural anthropology instead of administrative university work, he called me a disappointment to generations of academic Johnsons. We moved forward one step. The apparition howled with rage, its form fluctuating wildly. "He died before we could reconcile," Emily continued, her voice strengthening. "Changed his will to leave everything to the university instead of me. His final judgment on my choices." Another step forward. The apparitions multiplied around us. Clara, Sarah's sister, Thomas's brother, all with twisted, inhuman features beneath their familiar faces. "Keep talking," I encouraged as we neared the tree line. "Say the truth out loud." "I was angry when he died." Emily's voice broke, relieved even, then guilty for feeling relieved. Tears streaked her face. "I've carried that shame for 7 years." We broke through the final barrier of vegetation onto open beach. The apparitions remained at the tree line, hissing and distorting but not following onto the sand. "I couldn't save him from the stroke," Emily said, her voice steadying. "Just like you couldn't save Clara from her accident, but I can accept that now." The sun touched the horizon as we crossed the beach toward the tethered Cessna. The apparitions followed along the tree line, pacing us but not advancing onto open ground. "Almost there," I said, helping Emily through the shallows toward the plain. "Can you make it up the ladder?" She nodded, gritting her teeth against the pain in her ankle. I climbed aboard first, then helped pull her into the aircraft. The familiar cockpit provided momentary comfort. Instruments, controls, mechanical reality instead of supernatural horror. I secured the cabin door and began pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Fuel levels sufficient. Control surfaces responsive. Engine ignition sequence initiated. Outside, darkness fell with unnatural speed. The apparitions approached the water's edge, their forms more distinct now, a ring of translucent figures surrounding the plane. I recognized Clara at the front, her innocent features restored, pleading silently for me to return. "Don't look at them," I told Emily, who had strapped into the co-pilot seat. The engine coughed, then roared to life. I released the mooring line and began the takeoff sequence, guiding the Cessna away from shore into deeper water. The apparitions entered the water, moving with impossible speed toward us. Their hands reached for the pontoons as I increased throttle. Clara's face pressed against my side window, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear over the engine noise. "Goodbye, Clara," I said quietly. "I love you. I always will." Her image seemed to flicker, momentarily returning to the real memory of my daughter. Innocent, beautiful, free of the island's corruption. The Cessna gathered speed across the darkening lagoon. The ghostly hands fell away from the pontoons. The plane lifted free of the water, climbing into night sky. Emily sat silently beside me, her face illuminated by instrument panel lights. After several minutes at cruising altitude, she spoke. "They were all true, weren't they? The things we saw, not just hallucinations." I adjusted our heading for Fiji. Something on that island found the rawest wounds in each of us, used them as weapons. 5 people dead. Emily's voice remained clinical despite her exhaustion, because they couldn't face their guilt. Or because they faced it the wrong way, I corrected. Alone, in denial. The island fed on that. Emily opened her research notebook, making notes even now. "Wilson will want explanations. Evidence." "Wilson will want what he always wants," I replied. "Results, profit, control." The night stretched ahead of us, 3 hours of darkness over open ocean before reaching Fiji. Emily's head eventually drooped against the window as exhaustion claimed her. I maintained vigilance, checking instruments, measuring fuel consumption, calculating arrival time. Clara didn't appear again in the darkness beside me. Whatever connection the island had forged couldn't reach this far. Or perhaps Having spoken my truth aloud, I'd finally broken its hold completely. The Cessna's engine hummed steadily as we left Yasur Island behind. 5 colleagues remained there forever. 5 people who couldn't escape their pasts. I watched the instrument panel's soft glow and planned what I would tell Spencer Wilson about his failed expedition, about what his money had bought on an island that fed on human pain. Dawn broke over the Pacific in gradual increments of visibility. First, just a faint lightening along the eastern horizon, then spreading fingers of pale orange across cloud banks. The Cessna's control panel showed fuel at 17%, enough for another hour of flight if pushed. We wouldn't need it. Fiji's main island materialized through morning haze, coastline defining itself against the water. Emily had lost consciousness 4 hours earlier, slumped against the passenger window. Exhaustion, dehydration, and shock had finally claimed her after 30 minutes of fitful sleep attempts. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size, straining against her bootlaces. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. I radioed the approach to Nadi's private aviation sector, requesting medical assistance upon landing. The controller's voice crackled back with confirmation. Morning light glinted off the runway as I lined up the Cessna's floats with the water landing channel adjacent to the main airstrip. The seaplane settled onto the water with a series of gentle bumps, the transition from air to surface barely registering in my arms. Muscle memory guided the controls. A harbor guide in a small boat directed us toward the private dock where 2 figures in medical uniforms waited beside a stretcher. I shut down the engine and sat motionless for 27 seconds. My hands remained fixed on the controls. 5 people dead, 2 survivors. Nothing in the cargo hold but Emily's incomplete research notes and a few sealed botanical samples David had collected before his death. Emily stirred beside me as the plane bumped against the dock. "We made it," she mumbled, eyes struggling to focus. "We made it," I confirmed. "Medical team waiting. Your ankle needs attention." She nodded weakly. "Wilson?" "Not yet." I released my harness. "Let's get you taken care of first." The medical team boarded as I opened the cabin door. Their movements were efficient, practiced. They immobilized Emily's ankle, transferred her to the stretcher, and began a rapid assessment of her vital signs. The younger medic, a Fijian woman with quick eyes, glanced at me. "You require medical attention as well, sir?" I assessed my condition. Dehydration, fatigue, minor cuts across my hands and forearms from vegetation, nothing requiring immediate intervention. "I'm functional. Focus on her." The harbor master approached with a clipboard as they loaded Emily into a waiting ambulance. His weathered face showed professional concern. "Your aircraft needs refueling, sir." "Later." I nodded toward the plane. "Security watch until I return. No one accesses the cargo." He made a note. "Customs officials will need contact Spencer Wilson's office. All arrangements pre-cleared through diplomatic channels." I handed him the expedition documentation from my waterproof pack. "I need transportation to Nadi General Hospital." 37 minutes later, I sat in a molded plastic chair in the hospital's waiting area. The antiseptic smell mixed with the lingering jungle scent still embedded in my clothing. I'd washed my face and hands in the restroom, creating pink-tinged water in the basin from dried blood and dirt. My reflection showed 3 days of stubble and eyes that had seen too much. I plugged Wilson's satellite phone into a wall outlet and waited for it to power up. 7 missed calls from his operations center, 2 text messages requesting immediate status updates, no condolence messages for the dead. The attending physician, a tall Indian woman with steel-framed glasses, approached with a tablet in hand. "Ms. Johnson is stable. Moderate ankle sprain, significant dehydration and exhaustion. We've administered fluids and pain management. She'll need 24 hours observation minimum." "May I see her?" "Briefly. She's requested to speak with you." Emily lay propped up in a hospital bed, an IV line running into her left arm. Her face had regained some color. Her ankle elevated on a pillow, wrapped in compression bandages. "You look terrible," she said when I entered. "Standard operating condition." I took the chair beside her bed. "Doctor says you'll recover." She nodded toward the satellite phone in my hand. "Have you called him yet?" "Next on the list." Emily's fingers twisted in the thin hospital blanket. "He won't believe us." "I know. David's samples might help convince him. The fungi showed unusual properties even in preliminary testing. If we could—" "Emily." I kept my voice gentle but firm. 5 people are dead. Whatever Wilson wanted from that island, the price was too high. She closed her eyes briefly. "I keep seeing them. Thomas jumping. Scott with the gun. Robert at the stones." Her clinical tone cracked slightly. "Sarah running into nothing." I didn't offer empty reassurances. We both knew the images would persist. "Get some rest," I said, standing. "I'll handle Wilson." "James." She caught my wrist with surprising strength. "When you tell him, remember what the island taught us. The truth matters, even the parts we don't want to face." I nodded once and left her to recover. The hospital provided a private consultation room for the call. Glass walls, a small table, 2 chairs. I closed the door and dialed Wilson's direct number from the satellite phone. He answered on the second ring. "Rodriguez, status report." His voice carried the same controlled impatience I'd heard in his office, as if this were a routine business check-in. "The expedition failed." I kept my tone neutral, factual. 5 team members dead, minimal samples recovered, complete withdrawal from Yasur Island necessary. 11 seconds of silence followed. "Explain." The single word carried dangerous undercurrents. I provided the sequence chronologically, without embellishment. David's death from fungal toxin contact, Thomas pursuing his brother's apparition to a fatal fall, Scott's suicide after hallucinating his dead translator, Robert's death at the stone circle, Sarah's run into the hidden sinkhole. Wilson listened without interruption. When I finished, the silence stretched to 17 seconds. "So you're telling me," he finally said, each word precisely measured, "that my $50 million expedition failed because the island showed people ghost stories?" The island manifested traumatic memories, specifically deceased individuals for whom team members carried unresolved guilt. Bullshit. The veneer of control slipped. "You experienced mass hallucinations from environmental toxins. David identified fungal specimens with psychoactive properties. That explains everything." "It doesn't explain the Vaatu tribe's complete disappearance, or why local populations refuse to approach the island, or why 5 rational people with military and scientific training all experienced identical phenomena." Wilson's voice hardened. "I expected better from you, Rodriguez. Professional assessment, proper risk management. Instead, you lost my entire team and abandoned millions in equipment based on hallucinations. The seaplane is intact. Emily survived with research notes. Some botanical samples were recovered. Worthless fragments." His dismissal was absolute. "I needed comprehensive ecological surveys, geological assessments, marine life studies, specific botanical specimens David was instructed to locate." There it was, the specific instruction I'd suspected from the beginning. What exactly was David looking for? Wilson ignored the question. "Your contract specified team safety as your primary responsibility. 5 dead suggests catastrophic negligence on your part. The deaths weren't preventable once we understood what we faced." I kept my voice level despite the accusation. "The island targets specific psychological vulnerabilities, exploits buried trauma." "Save it for your therapist," Wilson snapped. "My legal team will review your contract for breach provisions. You'll be hearing from them regarding recovery of advance payment and potential liability for equipment abandonment." I had expected this reaction. Wilson's type always sought someone to blame when outcomes didn't match expectations. Your threats don't concern me. I stated it as simple fact. What concerns me is why you sent us to an island that indigenous populations have avoided for centuries, without disclosing its true nature. I disclosed everything relevant in the briefing materials. You mentioned superstitions, not targeted supernatural phenomena that could identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Wilson's laugh held no humor. Listen to yourself, Rodriguez. Supernatural phenomena. You experience toxic exposure combined with group hysteria in an isolated environment, nothing more. Emily has research confirming historical patterns. Dutch trading records documented similar experiences. Dr. Johnson is welcome to submit her findings for peer review. I'm sure the scientific community will find her ghost stories fascinating. His tone dripped with contempt. Put her on the phone. She's under medical observation. Ankle injury and dehydration. Convenient. Wilson paused, his voice shifting to something more calculated. Look, I understand the trauma you've experienced. Combat veterans often transfer stress reactions to supernatural frameworks when rational explanations feel insufficient. The condescension was precisely calibrated to undermine my credibility. I recognized the tactic from dozens of previous encounters with men like Wilson. I'm formally terminating our contract, I said. I'll decline all further payment and consider my obligation fulfilled with the safe return of one team member and recoverable equipment. You don't get to terminate anything, Wilson countered. My legal team will determine contractual resolution. You're welcome to pursue that avenue. I checked my watch, 10:47 in the morning. In the meantime, I'll be assisting Emily with documentation of our findings for scientific publication. Wilson's voice dropped to something approaching a threat. Dr. Johnson signed comprehensive confidentiality agreements regarding all observations and discoveries. Publication without my express written approval constitutes breach of contract with significant financial penalties. She's aware of the agreements. I kept my tone neutral. She's also aware that 5 people died because you withheld critical information about Yasser Island's nature. I withheld nothing. You failed in basic safety protocols and now seek supernatural explanations to absolve your negligence. I recognized the conversation had reached its inevitable conclusion. Wilson would never acknowledge what we'd encountered. His worldview had no framework for experiences that couldn't be quantified, monetized, or controlled. For the record, I said, what was David specifically instructed to find? The question hung between us for 12 seconds. That information remains proprietary. Wilson's voice regained its business-like efficiency. A courier will collect the satellite phone and any recovered samples within 3 hours. Have everything ready for transfer. The samples stay with Emily until proper scientific documentation is complete. Wilson's laugh held genuine amusement this time. You think you have leverage here? I own the samples, the equipment, the research, and contractually, any intellectual property derived from the expedition. You don't own the truth about what happened. The truth, Wilson said with finality, is whatever narrative prevails. 5 dead from environmental toxin exposure and poor leadership creates a compelling legal narrative against you, Rodriguez. Remember that before you and Dr. Johnson decide to promote alternative theories. The line disconnected. I sat in the consultation room for 6 minutes, watching Fijian hospital staff move efficiently through their routines beyond the glass walls. Normal people, normal lives. No whispers following them through corridors. Emily was asleep when I returned to her room. Her research notebook lay open on the bedside table, pages filled with her precise handwriting. Diagrams of the stone circle, notes about the Vaatu tribe, documented timestamps of each manifestation we'd witnessed. I left her to rest and walked outside to the hospital's small courtyard garden. The morning had advanced to full brightness, sunlight warming the stone benches where visitors sat with patients. I found an empty spot beneath a flowering tree and called my bank to transfer $50,000 to Emily's account. enough to cover immediate expenses and secure legal representation if Wilson pursued his threats. A nurse approached after I completed the call. "Dr. Johnson is awake and asking for you, sir." Emily had managed to sit up straighter in bed. Color had returned to her face and determination to her eyes. "Wilson threatened legal action?" she asked without preamble. "As expected." I took the chair beside her. "Confidentiality agreements, intellectual property claims, standard intimidation tactics." She nodded. "I've been documenting everything while it's fresh. The pattern is remarkable, James. The island doesn't just create hallucinations. It identifies specific emotional wounds and exploits them through increasingly sophisticated manifestations. Wilson won't acknowledge any of it. Claims environmental toxins and group hysteria." "Of course he does." Emily's voice held no surprise. Men like Wilson can't integrate experiences that challenge their fundamental worldview, especially when those experiences interfere with profit potential. I indicated her notebook. "What will you do with your research?" "Publish, regardless of threats." Her jaw set in a determined line. 5 people died. Others need to know why. Wilson mentioned specific instructions to David, something he was meant to find. Emily frowned. David was unusually focused on certain plant species, said they showed promise for neurological applications before we even landed. She leafed through her notebook. "Here, he mentioned compounds that might affect memory formation and emotional processing. Wilson's company has a pharmaceutical division specializing in cognitive enhancement drugs." The connection clicked into place. Wilson wasn't after resort property. He wanted compounds that could manipulate emotional responses. From an island that feeds on emotional trauma. Emily's voice held grim irony. "The perfect research environment." I stood, needing movement. "I've arranged financial support while you recover. Enough to retain legal counsel if Wilson pursues his threats." "Thank you." She studied me with analytical precision. "What will you do now?" I hadn't fully formed that answer until she asked. "Complete my recovery report. Document everything factually. Then find somewhere quiet for a while." "Running away?" Her question held no judgment, only curiosity. "The opposite." I moved to the window, watching normal life continue in the courtyard below. For 3 years, I've been outrunning Clara's memory, taking the most remote contracts, the most dangerous extractions, keeping busy enough that grief couldn't catch me. Emily nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "The island showed me what happens when we bury trauma instead of facing it," I continued. 5 people died because they couldn't confront their guilt. I don't intend to make that mistake again. "Where will you go?" "Colorado." The decision formed as I spoke it. Clara's mother still lives there. I haven't visited the grave since the funeral. Emily made a note in her book. "The island targets unresolved trauma. Those who acknowledge their grief survived." "Write that in your paper," I said. "It might save lives." I left Emily to her documentation and returned to the airstrip where the Cessna floated tethered to the dock. The harbor master had posted a security guard as requested. I nodded my thanks and began systematic inventory of the remaining equipment. David's specimen case contained 16 sealed vials with plant and fungal samples. Emily's research materials filled 2 waterproof cases. The rest, camping equipment, communications gear, scientific instruments, remained on Yasur Island, with the bodies of 5 people who couldn't escape their pasts. I secured the samples and research materials in my personal pack. Wilson's courier would arrive empty-handed. Whatever legal battles followed would be fought on ground of our choosing, not his. The afternoon sun beat down on the dock as I completed the inventory. Heat rippled off the Cessna's metal surfaces. Normal physical reality. No whispers, no apparitions. Just a man with a clipboard documenting what remained after catastrophic failure. 5 lives lost, seeking something that should have remained undisturbed. one survivor with research that might prevent future expeditions from making the same mistake. And myself, neither fully broken nor fully healed, but finally willing to face what I had buried for 3 years. Clara wouldn't appear again in the corners of my vision. Not because the grief had vanished, but because I had finally accepted it as part of myself rather than something to outrun. The island had taught that lesson with brutal efficiency. I signed the final inventory page and handed it to the harbor master. The Cessna would remain in Fiji until ownership disputes were resolved. I had no need for it anymore. My next journey required different transportation. A commercial flight to Denver, then a rental car to the small mountain cemetery where a yellow sundress had been folded into a child-sized casket 3 years, 4 months, and 22 days ago. It was time to visit my daughter properly, without fear of what saying goodbye might unleash. Yasur Island had shown the deadly cost of hiding from grief. I would not pay that price again.